Yes, let's talk about it indeed. Welcome back to another episode of Elaborate. I am so happy, you guys. My guest is here in person. They're next to me in the same room. They are a writer and comedian of the stand-up and improvisational kind, producer of the set list, as well as a teacher and a Zine enthusiast, if I'm not mistaken. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Van Glass is on the couch today in person. Hi, Jason.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming. And also for bringing your new puppy who's currently getting loved on my lap.
If you're listening at home, he's very cute.
He is
extremely
very
cute puppy.
Very, very cute puppy. You said he's like 4 months old?
5.
5 months old. He's bigger than my dog by quite a bit, but you say it's mostly fur.
He's all fur. He's like a stuffed animal, and
he does look like something out of the Henson workshop.
he only weighs about 13 or 14 pounds.
So he's actually weighs less than my dog.
Right. But he's like twice the physical size due to the length of his fur.
Jason, I'm excited because this is one of those shows. Well, first off, I'm excited because you're here. You're in person. This is the first one I've done. This is the first thing that you've done, like you mentioned.
It's basically the first thing I've done. It was only a couple of hours before this where I texted you and I was like, wait, can I bring a dog?
Right.
Because it hadn't even occurred to me. You asked if I wanted to do a podcast. Of course, I do want to do the podcast. I was so excited to do the podcast. Right. And then it was a week later where I was like, I have a dog.
Right.
I forgot that I can't just go wherever I want.
Right. Got the dog in the pandemic. Yeah. Not used to the living lifestyle.
Only got the dog a couple months ago. Still readjusting to the new world we live in, but also just like have to take some responsibility.
Right.
For another creature.
Right.
And the other example of this was like last week I saw a Facebook post where a friend said like, hey, take advantage of this offer. There's plane tickets, LAX or Burbank, straight to Yosemite for like $59.
Oh man.
And I was like, I'm not doing anything. Let's do it. And I was like, no, but I do have a puppy.
Right. I
can't just fly to Yosemite.
And you are a well-documented cat person.
Yes.
So this is definitely
I'm
different.
Fully infected with Toxoplasmosis gondii.
Wait, what? Hang on a second.
Oh, that's
too smart for me.
No,
he found a toy. All right, go for it.
A toxoplasmosis is a parasite that's in cat feces, and it spreads to cats because rats, or I guess humans,
right,
get infected by it in the feces.
Okay.
And then cats eat the rats or lick the humans.
Right.
And it infects the brains of new cats, and it's a parasite that lives in the cat, and it makes mice unafraid of cats. And by some scientific accounts, sexually attracted to cats. And before I had a cat, I liked animals, but I didn't have any like special. I will kill for a cat.
Right.
And it's because I just accepted that I'm infected with the toxoplasmosis.
Right.
If you're a cat person, I think that's what it is.
Right. That might explain why I like cats, and I have 2 of them. Do not like being roommates with cats.
You just need to clean out their litter box, and you'll be like, it's worth it.
I'm not a cat fan. Maybe.
Ironically, it's cleaning up their feces that makes you like. I would kill for the cat.
When Alexandra moved in, I told her she was a near perfect woman. Almost, because she had 2 cats.
Let's go through the faults.
Came with them. Well, that was it. It was the 2 cats.
Oh,
that was the faults.
That's like a attribute,
right? Well, it depends on who you are. But I will say, she has made it a point ever since. I mean, she's been here for a long time, but she's made it a point to be like, I won't let you have to deal with any of the cat stuff, right? So I really tend to not deal with it, but every now and then I do it because I'm not an asshole. It's like I'm like, clean up your cat shit. Have not had that effect yet. I have yet to follow.
Well, maybe your cats aren't infected. Not every cat is infected. It's a brain parasite.
That's what it is.
It's not.
So it's really a beneficial. It's the most beneficial brain parasite that I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually one of a large category of brain parasites.
It's this sort of knowledge that I find so fascinating about it.
There's one that sheep have that they get from, I believe, ants that get infected from it.
Okay.
And when an ant gets infected from it, it climbs to the top of a blade of grass and then uses its mandible to latch onto the blade of grass.
Okay.
And like dies so that a sheep will eat it. And that's how the parasite spreads. So the parasite takes over the ant's brain.
Okay. And he grabs onto a blade of grass with
the
his mandibles.
The effect the parasite has on the ant is that it causes the ant to climb up to a top of a blade of grass, which is kind of unusual, and then just like clamp on and hang out there.
Okay. Until
hoping that a sheep will eat it and it'll I believe the parasite reproduces inside the
It's like invasion
inside
of
the
body
intestines of the
snatchers.
sheep. So it's a similar to toxoplasmosis, which has like a cat mouse cycle,
Right.
and pretty clearly a cat human cycle.
Okay.
There's a whole category of these.
This is fascinating. And I was gonna say before we got into the cat talk
Mhm.
that not only was I excited that you're here today, I was excited because I don't really know you very well. We've met through a mutual friend and another
Yeah.
podcast on network,
Follow each other online,
the Monkeys,
which honestly,
with Kura.
that's a relationship now.
It is a relationship now.
2021, coming out of the pandemic. You follow someone on Twitter and they
But-
follow back. That's
That you're practically
You're-
common law married,
you're like an inch away from getting them to pick you up at the airport.
unless it's LAX. Everything but that. But I have since meeting you, I've listened to you. I've listened to stand up. I've listened to
Wow.
shows. I love that you just jumped into this because this is it. Like you have maybe the most obscure information rattling around your brain at any given time.
I don't disagree.
And
I wish
it's-
I had more application. like a functional body of knowledge that
Right.
was useful in some way.
Sure. I mean, it's got to lend
Not
itself to comedy in some sense because comedy's in the details.
Yeah, but that's not useful.
No.
There's no money in that.
Well, because there's a tipping point where the details become class, right? Where
It's like trying to relate to an audience about things that only I've heard of.
about genetic parasitic
Sure.
brain things. I don't where I can only take a guess based on your incredible youthful appearance about roughly your age range, and I feel like we're probably very close in age range.
This is a taboo subject in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I know, but
I didn't know this was that kind of podcast.
That's why I didn't say that. I
Well,
just said
hard hitting.
rough.
This is an edgy podcast.
Listen, that seat you're in, it's a hot seat.
For Burbank, this is as edgy as it gets.
It's a hot seat. But where are you from? Because you have a specific.
Well, I grew up in Northern California, where I'm an alpha male.
Really?
That's the first joke in my act.
Got it. That's fantastic.
I grew up in a suburb outside of Berkeley.
Oh, all right. See, I wouldn't have pinned that.
So it was a suburb. It was an upper class suburb, but it was next to Berkeley in Oakland, and a lot of people's parents had gone to Berkeley in the 60s and stuff.
Right.
So we were, and Oakland is, a very progressive,
Right.
historically progressive place. So we were, it felt like a pretty liberal place to grow up.
Sure. It's, that's actually interesting because I immediately, and maybe it's just the comedy thing, where I immediately place you as somebody who like grew up in the Midwest and was the outcast. But in actuality, you
just
were
a very normal
you were a
person
very
from,
normal
from
person
outside
from-
of Berkeley, California. Completely just like one of the gang.
Sure. What did your parents do?
My parents are honest, hardworking, middle-class people who bought a house in California in the 70s.
Oh, okay.
And my father spent 36 years at the State Fund of California, which is the state's kind of public insurance option.
Okay.
So it's an insurer of last resort. So it handles the pensions for all state employees, but it also will insure things that need insurance, but maybe
okay. So, but
it's a public option.
governmental job, though.
It's a state of California government job.
Okay.
And he spent his whole career there. And that's where he met my mother. My mother was there for 15 or 20 years and then had a series of other jobs.
They worked in a similar field at that time when they met?
Yeah, they're both technically IT professionals.
Got it.
But this was, my father's great joke is that he's the only person that moved to San Francisco in 1968 trying to get a job as an insurance agent. You know what I mean?
Right.
He walked into San Francisco into the office and applied for a job as an insurance adjuster.
Right. In fairness, the market, like supply and demand, it's probably one of the easier jobs to get in the era in the location.
I guess, but so both of them were in IT, but neither one of them is an engineer.
Got it.
Because there maybe wasn't, you couldn't really major in computer science in the mid 60s. So my mother has a English degree from Cal State LA, but ended up doing IT hardware setup, setting up mainframes, setting up email servers. And my father ended up as the head of IT, but he ended up as the head of IT after being the head of human resources.
Got it. But intelligent folks, nonetheless.
Yeah,
The squint,
but also like I think
squint, the delay there.
I only clarify it because today being an IT person means something different.
Sure, that's fair. I guess what
It's
I
a
meant.
completely different personality type and a completely different background. Whereas my an English degree from Cal State LA, my father went to University of Wichita on a football scholarship and got a psychology degree.
Oh, interesting.
But they both ended up in IT because they're in California 60s and they're both, interesting, capable people, but they don't have science backgrounds, which is interesting. Or they don't have hard science backgrounds.
Interesting. And you said your dad went to, you said it very quickly, a football scholarship?
Yeah, my parents, if you're listening to the podcast, you should know that I'm normal sized, relatively.
Yeah, if you're familiar with me, you and I are probably very similar.
Relatively effeminate, but pretty. My parents are giants.
Right. Oh, interesting. So you're a runt. I was also a runt.
They were surprised. Came out real small. Because they were they met at the office,
right?
And the joke was like I was going to be like 6'6" or something.
Sure.
Because not only are my parents tall, but like my father was like a linebacker. My father was an All-American linebacker. They're big people.
Okay.
My mother was the tallest girl in her class, and is over 6 feet tall.
All right. And so let me ask you this. This is just an attempt to see if there's any similarity here. As a kid who was a little runty, was the small one, I have something similar, whereas my father wasn't a picture, so it's not necessarily that I was drawing comparisons to him, but my godfather, my uncles, and my brother, who were like all of the men in my life, were all like Long Island machismo, like big, giant dudes. My brother was always this big, huge Marine guy. My uncles were all 6'3" or higher and like look Nordic and just, Viking of men. And I was always just this tiny little runt. And I know for a fact that instilled a long lasting issue with the way that I deal with masculinity and owning my own masculinity and or lack thereof at times.
Well, culturally, my parents are not.
Okay.
They both moved to San Francisco in the 60s.
Sure.
That's who they are.
Right.
My mother's from Tulare, California, which is like a rural Central Valley place. My father grew up all over the Midwest. And, I think a lot of people on my father's football team had that personality, but he's a very soft-spoken and thoughtful guy.
He was a sensitive athlete.
And my mother's sort of a hippie, and they're neither one of them are machismo or whatever, but they are. So, I am a tiny little runt. I cried a lot as a child. But they're both
and so
classic San Francisco liberal, but they also giant. They're freaky big.
And so having freaky big pseudo hippie parents though.
Yeah.
Pretty normal Northern California lifestyle as far as whatever I can assume that
didn't
is.
Seem out of the normal random things. Yeah.
Suburbia.
I mean, it's the Bay Area, and it's the Bay Area 20, 30 years ago.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not familiar. I don't really know what that would be. I've been there
You've
a few
seen
times
it on Fox
now.
News.
Oh, is that what it is?
Well, it's different now. San Francisco's changed dramatically, but it was like Portlandia or something.
Oh, really? Okay.
Or maybe Yuppies. Portlandia is the wrong example, but it's
a little upscale.
Like I said, we're near Berkeley, and a lot of my parents' friends went to UC Berkeley, and UC Berkeley in the 60s was both a top-ranked university and like a hippie epicenter.
Right.
And a lot of people went to Stanford, and
right on.
So there was a mix of 60s California stuff and yuppie, right. Lack of a better word.
Did your parents have any interests that specifically like spoke to you as a kid that sort of instilled whatever it is that it kind of triggered your personality?
They're both collectors, and I'm a collector.
I learned that very recently about you on a podcast that you did with former guest of the show Jackie Cation, which we're going to get into that because that was also fascinating to me. But they were collectors. Did they collect anything specifically that you also ended up collecting or interested in?
No, I think we collect slightly different things. But my father's a very serious coin collector and paper money collector.
Okay, that's a type for sure.
And he's very interested in. Here's something similar. We both collect like records, and we're both very interested in like magazines and old newspapers, which is kind of unusual thing to collect.
Yeah, you're big into the zines. In fact, you have one of your own.
Yeah, but definitely a big. I have one of my own, mainly just because I'm a collector of.
Got it. Of
interesting like alternative newspapers and things like that.
I know that you do have like a lot of your interests lie in sort of the counterculture.
That's one of them.
Outside of mainstream, a lot of times, often not American. I know that you have an interest in Japanese toys and Japanese television of yesteryear.
Into certain Japanese things, never the same. It's similar to the niche interest we mentioned earlier.
Right.
Never the same things other people that are into Japan are into.
Right. So even in your counterculture,
Very
interests,
isolating.
You are a
It's like I don't have anything against anime, but that's not
right.
That's not the source of the interest.
Right. And because there is also like you have this way about you where, like I've mentioned before, like you love the details. I could tell already, like you love the history. You're a researcher. There's like you can't have.
I'm a Wikipedia reader.
Oh, is that what it is? So
Let's not overstate it.
You're an avid wiki guy. But I guess I'm curious. I'm asking somewhat leading questions about your parents, just because I'm wondering if you got this from them. Like if there was interest, like if it's a sort of.
I do think I'm like. I haven't thought about much about it before, but I do think I'm like my parents.
Yeah, in the sense
my
that
mother's artistic.
Okay,
and I'm not much of an artist, but I feel like I did take art classes. I do think I'm of that mindset.
You're an
publishing
artist
a zine
in the spirit.
I'm just not very
what people consider an artist. Like pen
I'm
and
jealous
paper.
of people that are much better at it.
Sure, oh yeah. So that's that is being an artist, if I'm not mistaken.
I guess, but you know what I mean. I wish I could really paint.
Right.
I got that from my mother, and like I say, my father especially is a collector, and a collector of pretty interesting things like paper ephemera and.
Oh, okay, so it seems to me like maybe if your interests were peak in sort of the counterculture stuff that I do know you like, if they were peaked as a child, your parents were probably of the ilk where they supported it and.
Oh yeah, we'd go to garage sales every weekend.
That's fun. That is like a real healthy feeding of like whatever your interests were. Did you have like a specific drive when you were a kid of like, oh, this is the thing that I want to do? I want to get into government insurance like you, Dad.
I think comedy, but I didn't start comedy until much later.
Right.
But it was much later when I realized, oh, this is the thing I've always only cared about.
Right.
And if I'm going to do something, it should be the thing that I'm passionate about.
I had a similar thing where as a kid, I wanted to do a million things. I wanted to be, an actor and an artist and a comic book writer and a
Sure.
a wrestler and a rock star. But I feel like I tried all these different paths in my like teens and early 20s, and it wasn't until like my mid 20s that I realized like, oh, like I should have just been acting this whole time, because that was the one thing that for me personally like was driving my
Yeah,
thing.
that sounds similar.
And for what's almost probably like somewhat opposite, because I started stand up in my early 20s. And I did stand up for like a decade, and I love stand up very, very much, but I would hear other stand-ups talking about the stand-ups who, if they got a role on a show, would never do it again, and how that's awful. And I thought, oh no, that would be me. Like that would probably
my
be
dream
me.
is to get a role on a show so that I can do stand-up.
Right. So
like there are stand-ups that, because stand-up, it doesn't pay very well. It's a lot of like, it's not difficult work, but it's frustrating work.
Oh, it's
at any level.
It's a dedicated,
even the high levels,
right,
where it's like, oh, if you were out headlining 52 weeks a year, it's like, yeah, you'd be traveling you'd be driving to LAX or to Burbank,
right,
104 times a year,
right.
It's pretty whatever. So there's some stand-ups that quit or pull away from the frustrating elements of stand-up as soon as they're making real money being on a sitcom or something. Right. Well, but then there's others that lean into it, and I'm confident I would be so excited to just be like a little bit famous open a door for me to do a bunch of frustrating stand-up work for the rest of my life.
Although, as we mentioned earlier, you have to rethink everything because you have the dog now.
Sure, but I mean, that's my dream, to just do a bunch of frustrating like mid-level stand-up work for the next 40 years. If you're out there, if you're booking,
I feel
I will
like
come to wherever you are.
You know what? It's a common theme amongst this program and conversations I have with people about like realistic goals, and I feel like you've set a bar, and I'm very healthy.
It's very realistic, and yet I have not achieved it.
But what did you? So you did say that like stand up came late in life, and comedy.
It crystallized late in life, but that's also something I got from my parents. They're both very comedy savvy.
Are they?
And we would stay up together and watch the Letterman. We'd go to bed after the top 10 list, so we'd watch the first like 20 minutes of Letterman every night.
Pretty much before
we'd watch SNL every week. I watched The Simpsons with them when it was on the Tracy Ullman show.
Yeah, the original.
So we watched season 0 of The Simpsons together. We watched Seinfeld in its original run, like from season 1 or 2.
That's great.
So
both of your parents?
Yeah, and they watch Colbert and Daily. Not anymore. They're off, but like they watch Colbert and Daily Show every night of the week. They were watching it at midnight,
and they stuck with it. Like they're still comedy nerds.
I mentioned like Ron Funches to my father. I recommended like the 30-minute special. It's like, oh, you might watch. And he's like, that's your mother and I's favorite comedian. Is Ron Funches.
How old are your parents?
They're in their 70s.
That is hip. That is. If my mom is also 71, if I said anything about Ron Funches,
I pieced it together. It's because they knew him from At Midnight. But the fact that they watch At Midnight and then identify him as the funniest part of it is like very sophisticated.
That is.
That's a very savvy application of like, they're not just consuming it. They have real taste in my opinion.
At Midnight is a show that in its short, very successful short run was driven towards like the social media generation.
Yeah.
The whole show is at midnight. It's a.
I think it was on after Colbert or something, and so they'd watch it. But it's because they're watching Colbert, and it's because they, like I say, I grew up. They were Letterman fans. We watched SNL.
There's definitely a line from like I feel like anybody who went Letterman versus Leno, like there's a line to what Letterman was to modern day. Sort of. It's weird because I used to always say. Like alternative comedy or alt comedy, but nowadays so much of the mainstream is what alt comedy was 15 years ago or 10 years ago even. Like nowadays the fact that like Garfunkel and Oates or you say that people might know who that is 10 years ago or Bobby Tisdale or the all these names that are on these giant shows or Eugene Merman as
the so-called alt is definitely as prominent or more prominent than the so-called club
than it used to be for sure, but I feel like you draw that line directly from like people who stuck with Letterman versus, kind of the Leno generation of like very obvious. Because it's all that, like you say, it's somewhat counterculture, a lot of it. Yeah. And so I wouldn't be surprised if even just that comedic interest of your parents sort of fed your interest in the
it must have. I mean, I was obsessed with comedy as like a 10 to present sort of, but like,
of course,
like 12 or 13, 14 years old, I was using the newspaper to like figure out the schedule of what sitcoms I was going to watch. I watched the Ellen sitcom season 1. It was called These Friends of Mine.
Right.
It came out the same year as Friends. So they changed it to the show, like the Ellen show. I watched Margaret Cho's sitcom. She was from the Bay Area. So she's like huge in my childhood because she was like a local celebrity
who did well,
who then was going to have her own TV show, and so I just watched Comedy Central till go off the air.
Same
at in the middle of the morning,
2:30, 3 o'clock.
Usually it was like MST3K from 12 to 2, and then
right
infomercials or something. But so I was obsessed with Jake Johansson and Paula Poundstone and the people that were on Comedy Central in the early 90s.
Right. Yeah. I
watched hours of it a day.
That was me. I would just put in like a VHS tape, put it on like the, is it SP or E? I can't remember nowadays, which is the long one where you got 6 hours.
6 hours versus the 2 hours. Definitely 6.
And I would just keep Comedy Central on all day. And sometimes I'd switch back and forth if I knew something. For me, my big thing is, it's a weird thing, but Rosie O'Donnell, Stand Up Spotlight with Rosie O'Donnell. That was like, I feel like my true first, which was a VH1 show.
Okay.
And that was like when I really started, I think, watching, because it was like a showcase show where it was like the Young Comedian special or those things where it was like 10 minutes each and every night was 10 different comics or 9 or however long the show was. And I still to this day in the garage have boxes of VHS tapes. I don't know.
I have my VHS tapes of Mr. Show that I would tape off the air at like 12:30 in the morning and then try and show to people at high school during lunch.
I mean, there's a perfect example of like the counterculture alt comedy of yesteryear being the main,
and especially here in LA today, it feels great to have hundreds of friends and acquaintances that also love Mr. Show.
Right. Yeah.
Because in 1996,
the two friends in school,
and as a teenager without the internet or whatever, we have the internet, but not like we have now, where it's like you're just trying to show people this thing where it's like, look at this thing. And they liked it, but it's not this, it feels really good to have found my tribe.
For me, it was the State versus, like, I loved Mr. Show, but
State also great.
I didn't have HBO, and I don't even know how I watched Mr. Show. I think a friend of mine had got
we got HBO because our cable package replaced Comedy Central with the Animal Planet. And I sat my parents down and was like, this won't work for me. There's going to need to be some changes.
Yes. I need my Comedy Central.
And so
I need Penn Jillette to
but my parents are also big TV and comedy fans. Nerds. And so we got the Dish Network instead of the Comcast or whatever.
Right, whatever you had.
And so we could have Comedy Central.
And that
the thing I watched hours a day. And then we paid the extra $8 or whatever for HBO. And so I saw Tenacious D and Mr. Show and these other things that right at the perfect time in my life where they're on in the middle of the night. No one's else has ever heard of them yet or whatever.
Yeah. It
And
literally just fed an entire generation.
totally
of
taking
artists and
Tenacious D off the air and just like rewatching those episodes.
I still feel like Bigfoot on Tenacious D is one of the best television characters that does not get their due. But
And now look at us.
yeah,
Here we are.
Here we are in Burbank, 2021, I think. But what did you do then before stand up?
Nothing.
Really? Like, did you go to? First off, were you a good student? I always like asking this of comics.
I have severe attention deficit disorder and only started taking medicine for it at like age 27.
Got it.
So I was a terrible student, and I was like not doing any work, and I was like passing all my classes, but like bare,
Same.
on a technicality or something.
I always hate when people say this because I feel like it might diminish it, but I've always thought that I was undiagnosed for a very long time. That same thing is I never did a single day of homework.
Never.
I passed tests
All the time.
and all
I was
the
real
teachers
good at tests.
Yes, and all the teachers liked me, so they would give me passing grades even if I didn't earn them. Because
I don't
they
know
knew
if the
I was a
teachers
good
liked
Ken.
me.
Really?
But, well,
were you?
no, but I it's exactly that where it's like I wasn't doing the homework. I was doing the bare minimum of homework, and then I was overperforming on the tests.
Exactly same, and also just like being not a shitty kid. It wasn't
causing trouble or anything.
Same. Yeah, exactly. So
But it's definitely underachieving.
yeah,
Hardcore.
hard same. And I had like, when I graduated high school, I had like, I like didn't take enough science or math to like get the right kind of diploma at that year, but I had taken like 20 years worth of art and music classes.
Okay.
Because every year I would just like I would like, I want to take an extra art class. I want to take the third kind of band or whatever. And by the end of the thing, my guidance counselor was like, that you don't have the right amount of credits to get a Regents diploma?
They should tell you that at the end.
Yeah,
That's
I was
his
like,
job.
Thanks for that.
Why are you in charge of that?
Yeah, I'll never forget her name, Mrs. Charity. I was like, you did me no charities.
Oh boy.
That's a dad joke for everybody out there. Anyways, so what did you do then out of high school?
I went to UC Santa Cruz
Okay.
based on the strength of my
Stayed pretty close.
pretty good, but
my,
not extraordinary SAT scores.
My geography's not great. Not far from home, right?
It's about 90 minutes.
Okay, so close-ish.
And it's a very like traditionally liberal
Sure.
campus.
And stayed on campus, didn't travel? Like stayed at school, didn't stay at home?
Yeah. It's like, yeah. So lived in Santa Cruz. Graduated after I did 2.5 years at Santa Cruz. I got a bunch of transfer credits because I took AP art in high school.
Right.
And they gave me like full credit for that.
Nice.
And I was also working on the newspaper. And so I got credits for that. So I was getting like, instead of taking 3 classes, I was technically taking 4. And so I was done. I had like all the credits I needed after 2.5, 3 years.
Right.
So I did a semester in Japan, which was my last semester of college.
Interesting.
I got an economics degree. We don't have grades at UC Santa Cruz. They do now, but I did not have grades.
What do you mean they didn't have grades?
Oh, they didn't have grades.
Was it a pass-fail system?
You get like an essay about how you did in the class. And my transcript's like 30 pages long.
You're so dry that I can't tell if you're fucking with me right now because this is ridiculous. There's literally...
Home of the banana slugs? I don't know if you've heard of UC Santa Cruz.
There was no grades. This is like something that you see in like a modern day sitcom where like the young parents take their kid to like the foo-foo school and they say like, oh,
well, so
we don't have grades
UC Santa
here.
Cruz opened in 1966.
Oh, okay.
So it was initially staffed by a bunch of people that were at like Ivy League East Coast institutions, but were young and wanted to be in California. And so it was staffed by a really fascinating generation of academics who wanted to get out of Cambridge and be where the stuff was happening and had very, interesting or esoteric views. And so they set it up that the classes were going to be small and the teachers would know you and you wouldn't get a grade because a grade is like reductive. And eventually the school outgrew that. It's a public college.
Right.
They had this like special waiver that was really ending when I was there. So I'm the last year that didn't get grades.
Interesting.
I had the option to get grades and
you opted out.
Yeah.
At that point, why start? Right. I mean, you did 2 years or however many 4 semesters, whatever it was.
Yeah.
That is absolutely fascinating.
And it was also interesting time to be there because that generation was like retiring. So I had these people that were in their 60s and 70s that had were just very interesting. It was very interesting teachers that were there at that time,
And
because
they were probably first generation teachers of that school.
right, because they'd moved out to Santa Cruz in the 60s. They graduated from, you know, Yale or something, but they were stifled there in 1965. And so they came out to California and built this new institution. And so they were very interesting, weirdo academic people who had been there for 30 years that were in the process of retiring while I was there.
It feels like a creative paradise. It feels like the thing that like fosters really great creative people. Maybe not people that can function in society entirely, but people that are very, very, very progressive.
I mean, I never got a job afterwards, so I don't know. I can't speak to this, but it was a fine experience.
And
it was the right school for me.
Let me ask you this: while we're in the college years, because this came up on a recent episode I did with Drew Johnston, in which we talked about, like, I'm from New York and I was obsessed with stand up, but it took me forever to realize that I could go see and do stand up.
100% my story.
Really? So when you were in college
as we've covered, I was like, I was obsessed with Dave Chappelle in the 90s, Chris Rock.
Yeah. But you did nothing live.
Well, no. And also to get from like being a fan of Chris Rock to thinking I could do this,
right,
does take a certain level of disconnect or something. And I just didn't give myself the credit. Like, I'm not as good as Chris Rock, but Chris Rock's also the best, and you're watching the best version of him when you watch a special of him.
Of course.
And that's like him 10 or 20 years in, and he's also the greatest of the people that are even doing. And so I had put it on a pedestal or something where it didn't really even occur to me that I should be trying to do this thing that I was obsessed with and cared about. And the newspaper I worked at Santa Cruz was a comedic newspaper.
Okay. So were you writing comedy?
So it had a little bit of like Onion style fake news,
but
it was mostly real news, but done in like a gonzo Hunter S. Thompson comedic voice.
Okay, interesting.
And so it was very much a comedic newspaper,
right? And
so was doing comedy, and that's why I was working in that newspaper. But again, it just didn't occur to me that like the hubris it takes to get up to be like to watch Dave Chappelle on television in 1987. He's like, I should do that.
When did you first go to see comedy?
Like 30.
Really?
In person, yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. See, that's even more than for me. It was like
living in the suburbs. Where was I going to go see it?
For me, I guess that's fair. But there's always some comedy club that's an hour drive or that has some headliners in the weekend.
Didn't occur to me.
Yeah, I was the same. Where I was sort of like this aspirational kid who had all these dreams, but like nobody ever told me. I had nobody who went like, well, why don't you do this?
I really wish someone had pointed out to me that I could be like, it would be a dream to write a sitcom.
Right.
That's why I live here.
Yeah.
If you're out there and you're hiring people without due diligence. No, but like, you know what I mean? It's like, why? Sure, that's actually the kind of the first dream.
Right.
And it was because I was obsessed with Seinfeld and the classic Simpsons, and I later Always Sunny and these Larry Sanders Show. Deeply obsessed with the Larry Sanders Show.
It's one of my favorite TV shows of all time.
The first act of hubris was like, I'm obsessed with the Larry Sanders Show. I've deconstructed this. I've watched it so many times. I should see if I can write one of these.
Right.
And I wrote a spec of Always Sunny, and I was like, I did it. This is funny.
Right. Could picture it.
It came out. I could picture. I knew how to write in their voice. Right. It was funny to me. It was as funny as a real episode.
Right.
And I was like, I got to move to LA.
Right.
And so I'd been writing like one-liner type jokes for Twitter for an audience of no one. This is 12 years ago or 13 years ago.
2009 probably. Yeah.
I didn't have any followers, but every day I try and write at least one joke. And so I had like, I'd written 500 jokes, none of which I would tell now, but like,
of course,
you're just like doing the kind of homework of it. And I'd written a couple of specs, and I was like, well, I guess I have to see if I can do this.
Right.
And so I got a short stay here. I came down to LA for 4 months, and started, took a sketch writing class at UCB right away. Cause I was like, I can't believe you can even take a class in something like that.
Right. Yeah.
And I did stand up maybe 8 weeks after I got here, using the best of those jokes.
Right, sure.
Kind of a one-liner,
piecing together what you could.
Jeselnik type act, I guess. I didn't even know who's at Jeselnik was at that point, but that's what it was.
Right.
And the open mic went like, I just knew.
You just felt it in the bones.
Well, the open mic went well, but also it it was like a sort of test of the system.
Right. I get
and
it.
I passed the test, and I was like, I guess I'm doing this now.
Right. See, it was somewhat similar for me. But it is, before I even get into that, it's just, I'm happy to hear, and maybe this is not nice, but I'm happy to hear that you were also equally as obsessed with all of these different sorts of comedy, but never thought to like go and just see it or like go someplace.
I was watching it on TV all the time.
Yeah, and that was me.
And also, like I say,
felt like a nerd because
this is not I'm deeply obsessed with stand-up as a child,
right?
But sitcoms were that plus one or whatever. I was just so into Simpsons, Seinfeld.
Same.
I was watching the Margaret Cho and Ellen thing, as we mentioned. Yep. I was watching every sitcom and had very detailed opinions about them.
Was very that was one of those.
Not for me. That's like the Leno, but
really? Okay.
Well, maybe I just haven't seen enough of it.
There is a little Seinfeld Men About You split, but I also just love Paul Reiser because I saw one of his specials when I was really young, and I was just like, this. It's like the best comedian. So I like seeing. When I was young, I was like, as long as I knew somebody was funny once, I just liked watching them do whatever they did. I was also that kind of person where I became obsessed with people.
I don't know that it would have changed my life dramatically, but I do wish someone had just taken me aside at like age 16 or 19 or 22 or 26 and been like, you know how you're obsessed with sitcoms? Humans write those.
For me, it was
humans, human beings, not magical people, not super.
It's not a unicorn.
They're not deities. They're normal humans with skill.
Right.
Who get paid to write these. And if that's what you're passionate about and you want to create stuff, that's what you should be trying to create. And it took so long for that to click. I was like 27 when that clicked.
My awakening for that was, it wasn't until I was maybe 20, which I know is young for you, but like my neighbor was like, hey, I'm going to go into the city. Do you want to come to the city? And I grew up on Long Island, and it never dawned on me
you're outside of like the world's largest comedy
I
scene.
could just get on a train.
You could be watching Chris Rock for $10.
And so we literally just went, crap. I can't even remember the club we went to, but we went to, and it's like, Todd Barry, Ted Alexandro, Robert Kelly. The first comedy I ever saw was Robert Kelly. Like that was the first person on stage. I don't know if you can
tell from the sound of my voice, but I love Todd Barry.
Todd Barry is one of my favorites.
I would kill for Todd Barry.
But the thing is at that time, I was also, because I was a comedy nerd, I was seeing those same people on TV, not in the mainstream spaces, but in the same spaces that you were.
On Comedy Central late at night or a guest on Conan.
Yeah, exactly. And so being able to be in person and be like, oh wait, look, they're just hanging out.
That happened for me when I got here at age 30. And I was like, you go and see Comedy Bang Bang for $5 at UCB, and it's like, Bob Odenkirk is here.
Yeah,
Sarah Silverman is here.
Yeah.
Like two people I've never heard of are here, but I'm now obsessed with.
And then the young talent who at the time, like Paul Rust or something like that.
Amy Schumer or something, like be discovering, not that she needs my discovery, but from my perspective, like, where's this? Whoa.
Yeah. My first
Jeselnik.
show. My first show in LA, I was on the bill with Amy Schumer, and friends came to the show. And then, she blew up a few years later. She totally blew up.
Yeah.
And all everybody talked about was like, I remember when Amy Schumer was at that show that you were at.
You should hit her up for a gig.
Nobody talked about me. Yeah, of course, there's that. But yeah,
when I got to LA, it was paradise for me because I didn't realize you could just for free or for $5 in LA.
Right. Be in the company.
See Sarah Silverman, also the Sarah Silverman of tomorrow,
right,
etc. Like there's just an incredible amount of talent here. Yeah. It's free for the taking.
It's incredible. But my question though is where were you? Because when that door opened for me, at that point, I stayed that way for a while, where I was still doing too much of everything. I was still playing in bands, and I literally trained to be a pro wrestler for a little while, and did like refereeing, and I did all of these different things. I was completely directionless. I was trying to act in like shitty independent films and small films. And it wasn't until years later that I kind of trimmed my focus down to a couple things. Still to this day, it's probably too many. But up until that point, it was like people would ask, like, what are you doing with your life? And it would be like, I don't know, I'm working on a guitar shop right now. Like,
sure.
What was your interim?
Well, I worked in a comic book shop.
Okay.
You're just describing my life.
Really? We're very similar.
I was taking art classes and Japanese classes at the community college.
Okay.
So I was doing printmaking, and I was like learning Japanese.
After you had gone to Japan?
Yeah. This is the lost years. This is like age 21 to 29.
Oh, you and me, brother, the lost years. Well played.
So I took a lot of printmaking classes and a couple of other art classes, and I took six class units of 2 years of Japanese. Or actually, I think it was a year and a half of Japanese and then a year and a half of kanji.
Okay.
So I took Japanese like very seriously for 3 years. I devoted all my energy to that because I don't have a natural aptitude. I'm still not very good at Japanese.
Sure.
I got A's in those classes, but
again, the
but
aforementioned
I didn't have a job. You know what I mean?
Right.
I was just learning this language through brute force.
Right.
And working in a comic book store and like going to flea markets, selling things on eBay.
Got it. So you were just sort of.
I was living at home and like flipping things on eBay.
Got it.
Comic books.
Oh man, it's like there's almost too many similarities here.
But then I got Ritalin.
See, and that changed a lot for you.
And I know exactly when it clicked for me that it's like human beings, very talented, usually, right? Television.
Right.
I was helping a friend work a convention at the 30th anniversary Star Wars convention at the LA Convention Center.
Okay.
He was like a Star Wars dealer from Marin in the 80s. He had a store in the 80s, so he had all this interesting old stuff because he was near LucasArts.
Got it.
So he used to buy stuff that came in off the street, including what he's famous for is that he bought a Boba Fett's backpack for like $150.
Like the screen used.
One of the 3 used ones showed up at the shop, and he bought it, and then he took it to the 10th anniversary. This is 1987,
right?
And took offers on it all weekend. And he sold it to Steve Sansweet, who's a famous Star Wars collector, has like a book, he owns like one of everything.
Right.
For the best offer, which was $750. Now, of course, he beats himself up over this. It's like supposed to be like $1 million piece of memorabilia or something. But it's like that was the best offer. Yeah. That was the top of the market.
That was some future generational wealth.
So he was good. He was coming back to the 30th one, just set up a small table because he has stuff left over from when he had a store, and he was a visionary because in 1982, 83, he put an ad in the Marin Penny Saver that he was buying Star Wars stuff.
Okay.
And so people were like, well, do you want 100 posters that I got for free at work? And he's like, sure.
Okay. So he just started.
And kids would come in with like pieces of the Death Star they'd fished out of dumpsters, which is just like a weird piece of plastic or something. Right. But it's like, so he bought all this interesting,
obscure, weird.
He was a couple miles from LucasArts, and so people were selling him like Howard the Duck crew jackets for $10 or whatever. So he just has all this interesting stuff.
Right.
So he was working the 30th anniversary convention, and I was going to help him just man the table.
Okay.
And he had some pretty high end stuff from like he had the Star Wars concert poster.
Oh, interesting.
Which is a concert that was supposed to be at the Hollywood Bowl in like 1978 and was canceled. So the only posters, all the posters were destroyed, but it's this beautiful painting of C-3PO and R2-D2 with like big band instruments.
Oh, that's fun.
So it's this really beautiful painting, but then almost all the copies of the poster were destroyed.
Is it, do you know who made the poster? Is it that Drew, what's his name?
It's Drew, because he came up to the table.
Oh, what's his name, his last name? Is it Goose? No, Drew.
It's him.
Okay, never mind. People that know it are yelling at us.
I don't know if I should say this, but I
don't
know this for a fact. This is just my supposition. But he came up to the table and was like, they're supposed to send me 10 of those and I never got them. How much are you asking for this?
Oh my
Just out of curiosity. And then he left. And I was like,
wait, okay, so he's the one. So the artist.
The artist came and observed the fact that we have the paint. This poster was like $5,000.
That was unintentional.
It's a $5,000 poster.
Jeez Louise.
And so if you're a Star Wars at that time, it's famous in the context of Star Wars poster collecting.
Sure, yeah.
And so the artist came up. He's signing at the convention. And he's like, just out of curiosity, how much is it? And he mentioned that, they're supposed to send me 10 of these when I made it, and I never got them. And he walked away, and I told him, I said, my friend is like, that's probably his poster. Because like, who else, all they got destroyed. It's like probably, they were just never mailed to him, and then they ended up, my friend got it, or whatever. But
oh my goodness.
So that's what we were doing. And so he had some just interesting, because he was near LucasArts, he had some very interesting things. So stuff that only like a true niche, true, like not like a Funko collector, but like a Star Wars collector would recognize.
The Venn diagram of Star Wars nerd
of the high end, real serious stuff, because it's niche, real niche. And the nichest thing was that the LucasArts had a softball team in like 1978.
Okay.
And they had jerseys. And the jersey has like a drawing of, like Darth Vader, like helmet.
Okay.
But it's a softball jersey.
Right.
And my friend had the original art. That's the logo that's on this jersey that they made 20 of in 1978.
Right. And he has the art that was made for the jersey.
So he pinned it up at the top of the back of the booth. And only like 5 or 10 people talk to us about this in 3 days.
Sure.
But if they talk to us about it,
They knew what it was.
then you've started a real conversation because you're like, oh, how much is that? Because you've recognized this is the original art from the softball jersey from the LucasArts. It's this, it's like this very narrow thing.
There's like 70 people in the world who know what that is.
Right.
Yeah.
And they want to know how much it is. But one of the guys that talked to us about it was a Seinfeld writer.
Oh.
And he's the guy that wrote the Bizarro Jerry episode or whatever.
Did you know?
So my friend just, because my friend's like a Boston guy.
All right.
So he's always like talking. He's like, well, it depends what you can afford.
Yeah.
And he's like,
Sure.
This guy's like, well, I can afford it. I'm a TV writer. He's like, oh, well, what'd you write? He's like, Seinfeld.
Just a little sitcom.
But I like Star Wars. I'm at a Star Wars convention. I work at a comic book shop. I've wasted my life buying and selling action figures or whatever. This was the celebrity to me.
Right.
We'd met people that were in Star Wars come up to the booth. You know what I mean? Not necessarily like Carrie Fisher, but like people would come up, and if they had the like
the badge,
the performer type badge or whatever it is, they have a different color badge that's them because they're signing autographs or something. My friend would be like, oh, well, were you? And it's like, oh, I was the Wampa in the special edition, was like one of the real guys we met. And you're like, oh, cool.
Right.
He's like, I'm the special effects guy, and I stood in as the Wampa because I'm kind of tall. I was like, okay, good, fun. That's fun.
Yeah, that is fun.
But this guy was a Seinfeld writer, and then it's like now we're in my real fandom.
Right.
I like Star Wars, but there's no Seinfeld convention for me to go to.
Right.
Where I can just meet the writers of Seinfeld. It was like, oh, so then immediately I'm like, well, which episode? Oh, wow. Which episodes did you write? And did you collect stuff from the Seinfeld show? And he's like, yeah, I've got some of the like stuff from the diner. And I have the Bizarro statue. And you're like, oh, cool. Like okay. Now we're talking my language. And it totally, like I say, a normal person might have realized this when they were 19.
Right.
But for me, I was like 27. I was adrift, and it really crystallized. Like I don't care that much about Star Wars, but I really care about sitcoms and Seinfeld and the writers. The background of it more than like the, I really care about it. And this is a person standing in front of me that did all these things that is like, it's like being Michael Jordan to me. It's like, you wrote for Seinfeld,
or if
you're working on Curb.
If it was similar than it was for you, it was more than meeting Michael Jordan, because for me it was like when I first started to meet the people that were doing the thing, I was so far removed from reality that I didn't like. They weren't real people.
Yeah, it was just like meeting exactly what I'm saying. It's like
superhero. Like
it crystallized for me that it's like the names in the credits aren't like John Schwartzwelder is technically human. He's a human being. He exists in our reality.
Yeah.
He goes about his normal day, and he generated like 50 of the funniest Simpson scripts ever written. Not even just Simpsons. They happen to be Simpsons. 50 of the funniest things ever written are written by this guy. And maybe I can't be that guy, but I could try.
Sure.
And if I care about this and I care about comedy and I think I'm pretty funny, I should see if I can do this thing. Right. And that's how I'm here. And I would love to write a sitcom.
So
hasn't happened yet.
So all of those years. So at that point, were you still not in LA though, right? You were. Still
I was up in the Bay Area, and so when I met when I had this moment where I was like, I'm at a Star Wars convention, but I've met the person I care about. It's the Seinfeld guy, and it really crystallized for me. And I was sort of wondering what I should be doing with my life. Mm-hmm. And before I met him, I had like an idea for an Always Sunny episode.
Right.
Whereas like, it'd be funny if this happened. And then the next season of Always Sunny, they did that. Oh. And they used like the one line of dialogue I had. I didn't sit down and write this. I didn't know anything about the formal aspects of writing a sitcom. But I was like, like I had a pitch for an episode and I had like a line of dialogue.
Right.
And then it showed up a year later in the show. And I was like, I guess that was a good idea.
Right.
The next time I have an idea, I should like see if I can write it down.
Yeah.
Because my ideas are apparently occasionally as good as the real thing.
Right.
And so I'd had that experience.
And it didn't come from a place of bitterness?
It's very reassuring to see your ideas. It's not like they can't steal my thoughts. Right. It's not like they read my script and then stole it. I just like, it'd be funny if this happened. And then it happened. It happened exactly the way I was envisioning it. And then I met the Seinfeld writer and I was like, okay, so now this is what I care about.
Right.
It's possible that I could see if I can do this thing.
Right.
And so I tried to write an Always Sunny spec, and I did. I feel like I did it. I was like, wow, I kind of surprised myself. I was like, this came out, and it came out in a way that feels like a real episode to me. It has things that are very funny in it, but also like the format of it generated. I was surprising myself where like the structure of a sitcom generates a vessel that new jokes naturally appear in. And so I was like writing jokes, like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Hard to explain if you haven't done this, but it's like the idea of surprising yourself with the jokes you're writing.
Right.
It's like,
well, there's, once you outline something into a
the
formula,
characters are the characters, and the characters do what the characters would do next.
Exactly.
And
sometimes you just find that natural, organic.
I wrote
moment.
I wrote a spec that I was very proud of, and was like, well, now what am I supposed to do?
Right.
So eventually I moved to LA.
Right.
And I started doing stand-up. Stand-up's been going, it was pretty well. I'm 8 out of 10.
I know that
haven't been on Conan, but
I know that you have an association with one of my favorite places that I really, I've been dreaming about doing some ridiculous variety show at, but you have an association with the Pack Theater.
Yeah.
I see. Let me ask you this before we get into it. Did they survive the pandemic? Are we still around?
They're coming back. They're doing online stuff very successfully. You can take a class online at the Pack Theater.
Fantastic.
But the space is temporarily, they didn't lose the space.
Sure.
They gave up the space because they weren't paying rent.
Got it.
And so the space has been sublet by the landlord to other short-term things that are going to happen in the meantime.
Got it.
Until the Pack reopens either in the exact same location or next door.
That's good.
Or something.
That's good to hear.
So Pack Theater's okay. Unlike some other things that didn't survive.
You've also, so it's not just stand-up, it's also improv.
Yeah, I would say I'm primarily a stand-up, but improv took on a bigger and bigger role in my life. It's very hard to do stand-up in LA, and it's not easy to do improv, but it's easier if you're doing improv and you're applying yourself and you're getting better at it, it's easier to get roped into things because you can't do improv alone.
Yes.
And so to do improv, you have to be like, hey, do you want to come do improv with me?
I've talked about that on this show a few times.
And so stand-up feels very like closed door. Like you're waiting. It's like Fight Club. You're waiting outside the house, hoping that someone will let you inside to just do like 10 minutes for no money. But
I always feel
improv is a little bit like that in terms of house teams, but with the indie scene and stuff, it just felt like more people were asking me to like come and riff on this thing. We're doing an MST3K show. We're doing do you want to be in this sketch or whatever? And so improv felt much more open, and it took on a larger and larger part of my time.
It feel like those sorts of shows beget other shows, whereas stand-up, you're lucky if you're one of the 10 people.
Stand-ups are lone wolves, and improv is a group activity for the most part. But I'm a lone wolf, and I'm taking advantage of the group activity mentality.
Yeah, wolf in sheep's clothing. That's what that is. There's also the set list, which is sort of a blend of the two, which is a concept that I absolutely love. And you're a producer of the set list, if I'm not mistaken?
Well, so the set list is an existing property.
Yes, of course.
Created by Troy Conrad, and with Paul Provenza and some other people. They made a TV show in the UK. And when the Pack was going to 7 nights a week 5 years ago, they were looking for show pitches from people that were involved with theater. And I was like, well, if they're going to have stand-up at the Pack, it should be improvised stand-up. That's what set list is. We should clarify the important fact about set list.
It's the comics are given.
The comics show up on stage.
Material.
They see a prompt. It might just say, I'm looking at your poster. It says Sin City.
Right.
So it might just say Sin City. And then they're supposed to perform as though that's what they had planned to talk about.
Right. Yeah. We used to do something similar. So I lived in Florida for quite a while, and that's where I was doing the bulk of stand-up. And there was just something simply called the joke off that was a really popular thing, which it was the same thing, but it was competitive, which always makes for great everything. But where it was a topic, and both comics had to do their 2 minutes or whatever it is that they just on the spot of whatever the topic came up was, and it was like an advancement sort of thing. But honestly, I always thrived in that scenario. So much so that a lot of that material became my material.
That's great. I think it's actually very hard to do. And it was interesting. So I got permission from Troy to do official set list version of the set list, not just a knockoff version.
Trademarked.
Because I knew Troy well enough that I just thought we might as well get the real thing if we can. And if we can't, I probably don't want to do it because it's just like weird because I sort of know him.
Right. Yeah.
Luckily, he was totally down. And I hosted that for about 4 years. And it was definitely interesting to watch. I would get experienced improvisers to come and do the show, and they'd be very nervous about it. Right. So like
you said, experienced improvisers are used to being up there by themselves.
But like UCB teachers. So like these are like people that I had as teachers. Like And I'd be like, well, if I'm hosting this improvised stand-up show, you'd come, you'd do 7 minutes.
Right.
And they would be so nervous about it, and they would do so much better than the not experienced stand-ups, but stand-ups with a couple of years of LA open mic experience
Sure.
who are doing it's sort of two different skills.
Yeah.
And a stand-up that's good at set list is a stand-up that has learned how to really just be funny.
Right. And also
Eddie Pepitone, Jen Kirkman,
God.
someone that is like is writing jokes into a vessel where the way they perform is just funny.
Right.
And they're so confident that they're just talking their way through it.
Right.
And so it's very interesting to watch it for 4 years, where you see some people make the same mistakes over and over, and you see other people that have never done stand-up before in their lives, but have 10 years of improv experience.
Right.
Crush it, even though they're nervous about the thing I've asked them to do.
Well, because they've learned how to think outside of the box and not go with the lowest common denominator of whatever
they actually are used to just
is.
making something up on the spot and sticking to it.
Right.
And expanding on it and doubling down.
You also did a show I saw online that I was fascinated to see because he's one of my favorites. You did something with Emo Phillips.
I was doing improv, just the two of us with Emo for a while.
That is,
and it's been all downhill in my career since then.
You peaked.
You peaked with Emo. It was so incredible to do.
I mean,
and it was a fun year, and I've not topped it.
Talk about somebody who has figured it out. Somebody who can, honestly, I am convinced that Emo Phillips can he can react to anything, and it'll be the funniest possible reaction to that thing.
Watching him and Ron Lynch host the Tomorrow Show, they would improvise. They'd host the show, but they were just improvising bits.
Right.
Every hosting segment was 5 minutes long, and it was all made up, and it was all hilarious. And Emo's the nicest guy.
I've only gotten the pleasure to meet him once, and it was very much there's 20 people here, and hi, how are you sort of thing.
What gave me the confidence to ask him to do improv with me, a person he didn't know, was that I'd done like 5 minutes of stand-up on a Tomorrow Show where he was the guest host with Ron Lynch. And so I'd met him in that context briefly, but I knew when he hosted the Tomorrow Show, he would do this thing that I would not do.
Which was?
They'd do these wonderful hosting bits.
Sure.
They'd bring up the next stand-up, and he'd go backstage into the green room. He'd come run down the hall, and he'd stand in the back of the theater and watch their act.
Oh.
And then afterwards, he'd be able to tell Ahmed Baruch or someone, like, I love that joke about the crows. He was so genuine and so invested in people that couldn't do anything for him. I mean, Ahmed's a huge success, but that's not the motivation or whatever. It's just genuinely trying to be supportive of young comics and things. And so friendly and talkative in the lobby with people and so open that I got the confidence to DM him on Twitter and be like, hey, I was on the Tomorrow Show. I host this thing where a guest shows up and we do 20 minutes of long form improv. All you'd have to do is show up.
And it's Jason Van Glass and Friend. Is that what that one's called?
Yeah, it was called Jason Van Glass and Friend.
Right. And then underneath that, I saw the poster with Emo Phillips. Which is the title itself.
And I did one with Will Hines, which is another huge accomplishment for me because Will Hines is a different level.
Where were you doing those shows?
Initially, they were at I.O.
Got it.
And then they were at the Clubhouse.
No longer there. Yeah. Fantastic. So yeah, I mean, we kind of run the gamut from where you came from to where you're at now, but I do want to talk about just really. We should
talk about not comedy.
We should, yes, which is what I was getting at, which the idiosyncrasies that lend themselves to the counterculture we mentioned earlier. Right. The sort of the reason why we started this episode with information about brain parasites and sort of the interest in the subcultures that you have. You're obsessed. I learned on the Dork Forest with Jackie Cation that you're obsessed with these. The small Japanese toys, how you pronounce it in Japanese again?
In America, they're called Muscle, which is an acronym.
Yes.
Millions of unusually small creatures looking everywhere.
Yes, of course.
It's based on a Japanese anime that we did not receive here called Kinnikuman. Kinniku is muscle, so it's also muscle men in Japanese.
Got it.
It's like strongman.
Right.
A bodybuilder. And it's a wrestling anime, like a kind of cartoonish. It's not a sports anime exactly. It's a slapstick wrestling anime, WWF style wrestling anime.
Yeah, like
from the 80s that was very popular in Japan.
Like luchadors, Japanese wrestling versions of
alien luchadors. It has like superhero type types in it. It's a WWF thing but cartoons.
Sure. Is that the sort of thing that started when you were a little kid? Or did that
Well,
come
I
later?
I had those American toys as a little kid. So
Right.
the toys are like technically gumball machine sized.
Right,
They're
yeah.
an inch tall. They're like erasers.
Right. They started as erasers.
They don't work as erasers, but they're part of a tradition of a figural eraser making in Japan.
Right.
In the 70s, where they were making like sports car erasers and
Sure.
cute cat erasers and things.
We all had them on the back
And
of
so
our giant pencils.
eventually
at one
they
point.
stopped racing and just became small figural things that you could buy in a gumball machine.
So
as a kid, I had those toys and was into them.
now here's the thing: is the type of person who is obsessed with like all this comedy stuff and all this sitcom and like not the sort of person who's necessarily researching where things are happening, but still has enough wherewithal to like find this stuff as a kid. Like there's a level of like availability.
I didn't know about the Japanese thing until later.
Oh, okay. So it didn't come hand in hand.
I didn't know when I was 7 or whatever.
Got it. So
but
it
I was
wasn't-
always going to flea markets and garage sales and antique stores
it.
with my parents. So I never really stopped buying muscle toys because when I was
Right.
15, if I found 100 of them for $10 at an antique store or something,
Sure.
at the thrift store, well, okay. Because I was like action figure collecting and stuff.
Right. Was that so? Did you?
So like the childhood toys into the action figure collecting, there's like no gap.
Got it. Right on. Did you have the rumble belt that had the little pockets you could put them in?
Yeah, I have all
I
of them.
remember that. My friend had one of those. That thing was enormous when I was a kid. It's probably like this.
So I
big.
ran out of the American ones to collect.
Oh,
And
okay.
I started collecting the Japanese ones.
Got it.
But also it ties into, as you say, I studied Japanese. I went to school in Japan.
Where are those toys? What sparked that interest?
I think part of the interest in Japan is related to like Transformer toys.
Oh, okay.
But again, it's like most people that get into Japanese are either dating a Japanese person or they're like, usually it's like they're just super into anime.
Right. Yeah.
I got nothing against anime. I do love Totoro and Kiki's Delivery, but I'm not
Sure.
I'm not really an anime guy.
Yeah. Neither am I.
I'm the Tom Popo, the movie Tom Popo. I'm a live action comedy Japanese movie guy.
Okay.
If you're listening to this, I recommend the movie Tom Popo. It's on HBO Max and YouTube.
I feel like I've
My favorite.
seen
It's
that.
my favorite movie.
Yeah.
It's been my favorite movie for 25 years now.
Interesting. Now I have to write it down.
And
I got to add it to the list on Letterboxd.
it's a Criterion movie, but it's a comedy. It's just, I love it. And so I guess my interest in Japan is toys.
okay.
Sure. It's the music of the like 60s and 70s, which is also not the music that people are into when they're into Japanese music. They're very into the music of the 80s now. Like city
Right.
pop is what it's called
Sure.
retroactively. I'm very much into Kyu Sakamoto and other people that have never charted here, but I've learned about on
Sure.
YouTube or something.
And a lot of that did come late in life. I guess what I'm
It's
asking
just
is,
never stopped. So there's no starting point.
did you decide to go take that third college year in Japan because of this obsession?
First quarter at Santa Cruz, I took Japanese.
Oh, so that started even
And
there.
then second quarter, I failed out of Japanese.
Got
but
it.
then I still went to Japan.
And then
The
you went,
classes,
"Let's
the
go to
classes were in
Japan."
English.
Right, sure.
And then after college, I like came back and tried to, out of spite, kind of learn the language because I'd failed in this thing that I was like obsessed with doing but couldn't do.
You have to spell the name of that movie for me because I can't figure it out.
TAMPOPO.
Oh, it's an A. Man,
Tampopo.
see, Letterboxd. You should know what I'm trying to type.
Dandelion.
Oh, okay. See, I know I've seen this cover before. That's when you said it looked familiar.
It's an extraordinarily well-made and interesting movie.
Boom.
And so I'd seen that when I was in high school. A friend's parent had recommended I should see this movie, and they were right. And I just think it's such a great movie. And that's like the anime for me. It's like for other people, it's like Dragon Ball or something. But it's like I saw this
Sure.
movie Tom Popo. I thought it was so cool, and I was into like 80s Japanese toys,
Right.
and so I was into Totoro, I guess.
Sure,
So
sure.
I wanted to learn Japanese. And
Right.
I wanted to go to Japan.
Are you often the sort of person who like finds something that interests them and becomes like obsessive over it? Like they want to know everything about it?
Yes.
Yeah. Are there other things that have sort of like?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if we can make a list, but like as I say,
Sure, no.
I think one of my struggles. I think I'm a very good stand-up, but I think one of my struggles is like relating to an audience,
Sure.
and it's not just because I have esoteric interests. I think I'm just like I think of myself as being pretty normal, but I think on paper
Right.
I'm pretty weird.
Sure.
I'm
No, that's-
asexual. I don't know if anyone's
Sure.
ever heard of that.
Right.
My parents are not religious. I'm sort of religious.
Right. Oh, interesting. That's rare. It's usually
They're not
rare.
really, they're hippies and
Right.
I'm, but I consider myself a Buddhist.
Okay.
And I also consider myself an animist.
An animist?
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
That's the point.
Sure.
No audience cares.
Great.
There's nothing, you know what I mean? We can't
Sure.
be like,
No, I get it.
you guys ever observe the cycle of nature?
Okay, sure.
Doesn't matter. So I'm queer, but not in like a way that anyone's ever heard of. I'm
Sure.
religious. Politics are a little strange.
Which here's the thing is like, yeah, you might have a hard time relating to the audience, but you also have a perspective.
I can be my type.
Yeah, that is
I kill
very unique.
in the South. I had the most fun of my life in like Alabama and stuff, because it's like I got purple hair.
Right.
I'm dressed in like pretty LA normal, but like effeminate hipster clothing. And I'm comfortable as that person, and I'm confident on stage.
Right.
And you know, that's all you just crush as like an example of a fish out of water or something.
Right.
In LA, I'm not a fish out of water, but
Right.
but boy, do I have fun on the road. Because if I'm
in
Kansas City or something, these are the most fun shows I've ever done, because I just have to be myself, which is like, parents are California hippies. I'm one too.
Right.
I'm asexual. We can explain it if we have to.
No, people,
et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm a little, I guess I'm a little bit weird.
Sure.
And because I'm asexual, I don't have any dating experience, but there's like I just have like a lot of free time.
Right.
Also don't have a job.
Right.
So I don't have like a normal job, and I'm not in a relationship.
Right.
And so I just like wake up at noon, and it's like all free time.
Right.
And I've used it to read just like the weirdest books.
Oh, so you're a big reader? Is that where a lot of the knowledge and a lot
try
of the
to
stuff?
be.
Yeah. Oh,
sometimes it's just Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Or Twitter or something.
Sure,
but I'm trying to read a book because it feels more productive than reading Facebook all day.
Oh, that's smart.
But the books get narrower and narrower too.
Right. Sure. And so, like, do you have a heart? Because I'm sort of similar in the sense where I don't know that the scope is as grand as it sounds with you, but I'm a complete teetotaler. I've never drank. I don't do recreational drugs in this traditional sense, but like a lot of it comes from the fact that my father, I know, is alcoholic. Like addiction runs in my family real deep for generations, and I just feel like I have an addictive personality about the stupidest things.
I have an addictive personality as well.
Right. Let alone the things that might actually cause me
There's
harm.
no other way to do stand-up for 10 years. You'd stop.
You're not
You wouldn't
wrong.
just keep showing up and ruining your life every day.
Oh yeah, it's true. You quit stand up after every show, and then you start stand up again just before whatever the next one is. But so that addiction, does it, like the addictive personality towards these specific things?
I think it's under control, but
Yeah,
like I
you found
say,
balance.
it's like you read books, but it's like if you're not reading the best-selling, even interesting or literary or books that other people are reading, it's like you have no one to talk to about this thing you've read.
That's true. It just lives in you.
You're just really trying to tell someone about this book that only you've read. It was so good.
But you're also, for somebody who mentioned obviously that you had for a long time undiagnosed ADD, and you said that Ritalin has helped you kind of get into that.
Changed my life.
You sure do also retain a lot lot of information. Because that's my problem. Is I become super obsessed with something for like 3 months.
I'm not sure I do.
Really? I mean, all right. Maybe it's just our brief interaction, but I feel like you can very easily pull information that's very detailed information from places that.
But that's because I'm steering the topic of conversation to
That's
Ted
fair.
Kaczynski.
Because you want to get into the detail that you know. Is that what it is?
It wouldn't be a podcast with me as a guest if we don't talk about Ted Kaczynski. We don't need to do it. But
All
now
right.
that I've mentioned it,
The
seal is broken.
The quota's been hit.
Because I don't know anything about other movies.
Right.
In LA, people love movies, and in improv, you're getting the word is pimped. You're getting named. You're getting pressured into playing. It's like you're going to be so and so. I can't even name an actor right now.
Sure,
and I never
sure.
have any idea who it is, even though it's for sure like one of the world's most famous.
Right.
It's not Tom Hanks, but it's
Sure,
like
yeah,
it's just like you're gonna be this.
You got a little
it's like,
Tig-Notaro in you. Yeah.
Right, and it's because
Yeah.
I don't watch a lot of movies
Right.
a year. They're too long. I don't know why we're still making them.
I'm the exact opposite.
We make like one good one every 2 years, and then we should just be done. We made Get Out. What are we still doing?
Oh, that's really funny.
And so there's huge, whatever I do know is about some weird thing, but I have huge blind spots of normal knowledge.
I just can't retain shit. Like I become obsessed with something for 3 months, and I'll research the hell out of it. Like every time God forbid I watch a movie that's like biographical about something.
Mm-hmm.
Every time a movie ends that is a true story, I am like a Wikipedia,
you'll check out the facts.
guy.
Yeah, you'll Wikipedia.
But then it'll just be all I talk about for like 3 months. And then it will immediately leave my brain for all of time and space. In fact, it's funny to say you don't watch movies. I tend to not watch movies as rabidly as some of my cohorts do that are also movie nerds.
There's a lot of peer pressure in Los Angeles to watch a lot of movies.
But it's also
they're never good.
Well, that's the thing is I do watch a lot of movies, but when I say is like people that are like, oh, this movie came out 3 months ago and I've already seen it 6 times. I'm like, no. I saw it once. Now I've forgotten literally everything about it. So when I watch it again one day,
it's so rare that I see a movie and I'm like, we should watch this again.
Same. Well, or at least for a long time.
Never once have I been like, this movie was not long enough. Right?
Why do you feel like movies are too long?
Well, because I have ADHD.
Is that what it is? Really?
You can read one page at a,
Fair.
You can read a book for 5 minutes and put the book down.
Every movie is a web series that you just haven't broken up yet.
I just don't. I know I'm out of step with the rest of our peers here in Los Angeles, where we have to really care about Spring Breakers.
Oh,
but that was
the
so
worst
bad.
Movie. I hated that movie so
and
much.
The person that recommended it to me, I don't trust him now.
Yeah, I cannot. I do not like that filmmaker, and that film is atrocious.
I saw it for like $1, the Dollar Theater, but I saw it because I heard someone talking about it in front of me for 10 minutes or something. I was in a group conversation where he was raving about it. I was like, all right, I was like, I hate this. What's wrong with people?
It's also funny that you referenced that movie of all movies because that movie.
I'm still mad.
I can't stand it because
it's been 8
it
years.
doesn't have an attention span.
It was so bad. I thought about leaving.
You quitting
10 minutes into it,
Oh, yeah.
just like walking out.
It's rough.
And it's like, well, I spent $1.50 to see it. We should see if it gets better.
Oh, it's really rough.
It didn't get better, but also,
all right,
I just don't. I have a short attention span.
What about the things that pique your interest? So you said you worked in a comic shop for ages. Do you like mainstream comics? Are you like a Marvel?
I'm a big comic book collector. And once again, people are like, want to talk to you about like Wolverine's backstory.
And you're just like, I don't know.
If you work in a comic book store, people come in and they want to explain the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh to you.
Oh, good.
But they also, that's like children want to do that. But then adults come in and they want to talk to you about like something Cyclops said to Wolverine. Right. And I could not care less.
Right.
I have no interest in the storyline that's in the books.
You probably have the issue at home.
No, I collect.
Oh, okay.
I collect like 80s.
So it's more obscure.
Black and white stuff.
Right.
And my interest in it is the physical object and the history of that object compared to like the contents of the book.
Oh.
So it's not oriented towards, the ones I collect are ones I read and enjoyed.
Sure.
But I'm not like buying them to read them again.
Right.
I'm very interested in the physicality of this kind of like underappreciated or obscure thing that survived. Like a pamphlet that survived for 50 years.
I get that. That is actually where I don't collect it. Like I'm a big comic reader, but I don't collect comics. Like single issues, I have like a couple, but I collect trades because like, I read.
It's embarrassing to admit this. I'm a very serious comic book collector. I've basically run out of things to collect. Right. But also it's not relatable to other people that are like that because I'm not trying to get Hulk 181, the first appearance of Wolverine.
Sure.
Something I know.
Right.
And something I would buy and resell if I had the opportunity. I've never found one, but like I have, to the extent that you can call it a complete set, I have like more than a dozen. These are from a 5-decade span, like promotional comic books that are against drug use.
Okay.
So I have ones from the 50s.
Like produced by Dare.
Yeah, but I mean, they're usually like pamphlets. They're not usually comic book size, but sometimes they are, but they're drawn as comic books. Right. So I have one from like 1956 that's about like a white college student falling into heroin addiction. I have some that are put out by Alcoholics Anonymous that are about
rarity. It seems like that's interesting,
but they're not even. They're obscure.
Sure.
None of these cost me more than maybe the most expensive one I spent like $35 on, and it's like a 50-year-old heroin comic. You know what I mean? It's like not that expensive when you think about it. It's like a pamphlet they handed out to junkies in 1959.
Oh, it's like
there's not a lot of them floating around, but it's also not.
But who cares?
Well, it's just obscure,
right? Yeah.
But I just think they're really interesting, and so I have one that's about from the 80s that's against huffing.
All right.
I have ones that are anti-smoking, of course.
I'm gonna throw something out there, and you tell me if this is off base or if it's if I'm just making leaps and bounds to somebody that I barely know. not that long ago in this conversation, you said like, oh, I have a hard time, connecting with the audience. People see me and they guess I'm kind of weird. I'm
No,
asexual.
I want to be clear. I crush with audiences.
Okay, you know what I mean.
But I'm not joking. I'm like,
I get it.
It's like the only reason I haven't quit.
I get it. I guess what I'm saying is like you definitely have the view.
My
a view
artistic
of yourself.
problem
Sure,
is
yes.
figuring out a way that I can convey the things I have funny observations about in my life and making them relatable or at least understandable.
Right.
If not relatable, maybe you don't need to relate to asexuality, but how do I frame this in a way that you understand what I'm talking
yes,
about?
Communication. It's the communication.
About how much free time I have.
Sure. All right. Well, my fake attempt at poignantism here
fine.
is you see yourself as this thing that may be obscure, and you tend to have an obsession with maybe objects and things that you put yourself in a category of, where maybe, in your own eyes, you are the obscure anti-heroin.
No, I think it's
pamphlet.
ADHD. I think I just get
It's
bored.
just that? It's not as deep as that?
Because comic book collecting before the internet.
I tried.
But if you
Yeah.
in the 60s or 70s or 80s, if you wanted every Amazing Spider-Man, I like Spider-Man. There's nothing wrong with Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to collect all of them,
Right.
you have to go out and find them in the wild and get lucky.
it's a
And
hunt.
comic book stores started to exist in like maybe 1980, the first comic book stores, but they don't necessarily have like every back issue and stuff. And so,
Right.
and now if you want any issue of Spider-Man, it's just a question of money, and you just go buy it. You can buy it in
You
2
can
minutes.
find it online.
And it might not be the price you want, or maybe it is, but there's nothing stopping you from having that.
Right.
And having gone through back issue bins for 25, 30 years now,
Right. Yeah.
there's some stuff you see a lot of,
Right.
and there's these niche things you discover that it's fun to collect. It's fun to collect these muscle figures because there's in the American ones, there's 232 different ones.
Right.
And then they came out in additional colors. So
Right.
there's 500 or 600 different
I
ones.
saw that,
They
yeah.
cost $0.25. They're not worth anything. They cost
Right.
$1. But to get all 600 of them is like a little bit of a little treasure hunt.
And
It's a
there's-
little bit of a hunt.
There's also, I know, especially with that sort of thing, there's also a little bit of like the fun gambling high too, because sometimes you buy a lot and you don't know what's in the
when
lot.
you find one,
It's
when
like
you find
trading
one you've
cards.
never seen before,
Right, yeah.
And so it's not. There's to me there's a lot of people that are collectors are just about buying a Funko Pop. It's about spending money.
I
It's
don't
about
have that.
buying like a new manufactured thing, and for me, it's about finding something of aesthetic value.
Yeah.
That is actually like cheap. It kind of ruins it for me if they become valuable, because it's like, well, we should sell these.
For the briefest period of time, I don't know if you can see them to the right of the sound system there. CADs. You know what CADs are?
It's a music format.
No, it's a movie format.
Okay.
Where
It's like a pre-DVD or almost same as time as DVD.
It's actually came out pre-VHS, and it lost to the beta VHS war because it was so big and cumbersome.
I have a large Laserdisc collection. Thank
All
you.
right, see, so it's almost like it's like the old Laserdisc sort of thing.
But what I like about Laserdiscs
and it's like a record.
is that they cost $1 because they're just in a record bin at the Salvation Army.
Yeah.
There's no, at the risk of offending someone that knows which ones are valuable, which is
Right.
like there are some valuable ones.
I'm sure.
But they are generally worthless.
Right.
They're generally considered worthless. And if they're valuable, that doesn't stop the fact that the general public considers them a cassette tape. They're
Right.
just trash. They're usually $1, but there's all sorts of weird things that came out on Laserdisc,
Yeah.
and I will buy it for $1.
Right.
I will buy the encyclopedia on Laserdisc for $1
Right.
because it's just weird. And I will buy these goofy movies,
Right.
and it was a very popular format in Japan. So there's tons of stuff that only came out in Japan and Japanese stuff that came out.
Sure.
So it ties into that
Right.
subcurrent.
For me though, I found myself searching for them, and it became
CAD. Now these are these 12-inch size.
yeah. Well, I'm gonna
so
go get you one.
I have
Hang on,
these.
I'll get. Oh, really? You have a couple of them?
I used to have them.
Because they don't come out like
They're very heavy.
The
They
case
need a
doesn't come
special
out.
player. The case is unopenable, but
Yes.
if the machine opens it, or if
Yes.
you pry it open, it has like what looks like an LP record in it.
Yep, exactly. That's what they are. Yep.
I have Reefer Madness.
Capacitance electronic disc.
Okay.
CEDs. That's
I
what
just
they're
didn't recognize the acronym. I have Reefer Madness on
called. on CED.
on CED.
Um,
I thought you said CAD.
I
which
did.
is
I
something
fucked it
else.
up the first time. That's why
I feel like that's
I screwed it up.
might be another thing. But CED, yeah.
CED, right. So there's an example of a thing that I saw and I went like, oh, these are really cool. And then
And they're $1. I mean, you could be going to, as I did, to flea market every weekend for years. And then before you see one of these, and you're like, what is this?
But then at some point though, I find myself doing the thing, and this is also like, might just be a personal, whether you were raised kind of things. I grew up, my mom was a hoarder. And so once I start having a thing that I don't know what to do with, too much of it, I start having this sort of like, why am I doing this? But then I move on to another thing. So I have like a bunch of tiny
I majored
collections.
in economics, and I've been selling on eBay since 1998.
Yeah.
And so for me,
it's an investment.
That's an inseparable part of the collecting is that things are either a good deal or a bad deal.
Right.
And some stuff I am, a lot of what I am collecting is just to flip.
Okay.
And then there's the sub thing where I'm finding like these things I want for myself.
Right.
That aren't necessarily valuable. And like I say, if it's valuable, then it kind of ruins it. If it's worth $20, that's who cares?
Right.
But if it's worth $200, it has no right to be.
Right.
It feels like you might sell it unless it's really meaningful to you.
Sure, of course.
And so
you can properly balance out like the value of keeping it versus the value of selling it, which is something I've struggled with my entire life.
And the selling started as a way of like writing off the like, I spent $22. I'm in high school. I spent $22 on 22 action figures.
Right.
He-Man and Thundercats and stuff.
Sure, yeah.
But if I sell this one on eBay for $22, then the other ones were quote unquote free. And so I've been selling down the collection of that period of my life where you could buy Thundercats for $1, He-Man for $1, and I bought every Transformer, broken or not, for 50 cents. And I have a drawer of them or whatever.
Right.
And I acquired all this stuff cheap. You can buy Nintendo games for $1.
Right. Yeah.
Collecting video games until they became collectible. And then I was like, no, I can't,
like,
I can find them for $1 and I'm not going to spend $100 on them.
Right. Places like, you ever been to like Game Dude up in Van Nuys or
no, but
those places
in the late 90s, I was collecting Nintendo and Super Nintendo games.
Right.
And I have many sealed ones for that reason because I buy them at the flea market for $5.
Right. Right.
But I've sold down.
Right.
The hoarding portion of my life has funded the like last 10 years, basically.
Got it.
As that stuff has become, in some cases, more valuable, but also just that it's what it's worth, but I have it. Right. I have no money into it.
Sure. Yeah.
And I feel like I can sell it.
You seem to find this really nice Zen balance with the collecting thing too, because it doesn't seem like some people you hear about like, oh yeah, they collect stuff and it's like, and it's also a problem. But you seem to have this really, like you said, this economic, viewpoint behind it.
I think I've got it under control now.
Yeah, it seems healthy.
But also I sort of run out of things to collect.
Right.
I would say that's my main collecting problem right now because I have no interest in like a thing you'd buy at Spencer Gifts.
I'll tell you what, I have in the garage right now. I have a couple boxes. I don't know why this was a thing when I was a kid, but I started doing it. I have a whole ton of nutcrackers, handmade nutcrackers. Give you a great deal on them.
Hard pass.
I don't know why. At some point when I was a kid, it was just decided that I was going to start collecting nutcrackers. So every year around the holidays, I'd end up getting like 3 or 4 nutcrackers from different people. And I have a ton of totally useless, terrifyingly ugly nutcrackers.
That's one of my nightmares.
I don't know why I still have them in a box. I think it's like I don't want to feel bad about other people who got them for me when I was little, and so I haven't brought myself to just get rid of them or bring them to a Goodwill.
That's a real phobia of mine. But no, just like having stuff that is useless and taking up space. So as a teenager, I was buying like tons of dollar action figures and video games and old video game systems.
Right.
And that continued into my 20s, and I was like really stockpiling stuff while selling stuff. Coming out ahead, but you only need to sell one thing for $20, but if you're buying 20 figures for $1 each,
especially if you're
I've spent the last 10 years trying to get the stuff out of my old childhood bedroom, my parents' house.
Do your parents still own the house you grew up in?
Yeah, and I've now it's really been narrowed down to stuff that is either like personally meaneful to me in an aesthetic way. It's either sentimental or I just appreciate its like aesthetic value, and I can't get the right price for it.
Right. If
I could get the right price for it, I'd probably sell it.
Right. That's why those are the remaining. Because I sold all of the ones I bought except for those few, because those are the ones that are like, I really enjoy the art on these.
I found Swamp Thing on CED once.
Oh, that's a fun
and
one.
I gave it to Mike Sterling.
Those are the Rockies.
Swamp Thing collector.
Those are the Rockies, and then a bunch of Bonds. I was like, the Bond covers are always so lovely.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of old Bonds in there. I was like, that's a fun thing. And also, like,
I got rid of all of my Laserdiscs that weren't
rare, weird ones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Weren't something I was like, I might watch this.
Right.
Or this is just like really
Yeah.
fun.
You didn't
but
need-
I
you didn't
don't
need
have a bunch of
Independence
copies.
Day on
Exactly.
laser.
I don't have
Yeah,
a bunch of
yeah.
copies of Speed.
Right. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
I narrowed it down, and then I ran out of Laserdisc to watch during the pandemic. I was like, oh no, I've watched all 40 Laserdiscs.
I can't remember. Do you still have to flip a laser disc?
I have a player that automatically flips them.
Ooh.
So
how
pretty
quick?
fancy.
How quick does that player do that? Pretty
Less
quick?
than 10 seconds.
Wow.
I don't really know how it does it. It
All
must move
right.
the laser around.
Listen, this is luxury laser disc. That's the name of this episode.
That's something you're going to want in a Laserdisc player because they're always on two sides.
By the way, I searched for a CED player and I could not find one.
Very
in
expensive,
the
I would
area
think.
that was
Yeah.
worth like the one I found. The closest one was like
Not because of demand.
$310.
Very expensive.
Yeah, and it's also
I've never seen one.
it's
in
also
person.
the size of the air conditioner.
Yeah, it's like a piece of 70s
it's
hardware. Yeah.
it's
wood paneled usually.
it's wood, and you can put
Yeah.
a table, like you can eat on it if
Yeah.
you wanted to. They're enormous. But anyways, listen, we can yap about collecting stuff. I feel like we could do this all day long.
We barely scratch the surface.
Barely scratch the surface.
I don't usually talk about my collecting because I find
I'm fascinated by it because it's such, I don't know, that, you know what, I think that the thing that I find fascinating specifically about you is that especially in comedy, and like you meet people, like for a while I was working with Tom Wilson, and Tom Wilson collects vintage lunch boxes.
Mm-hmm.
I have a old Marvel lunchbox on the table behind you that he gave me because somebody brought it to him in a stand-up show because they know that he collects them,
Sure.
so they bring him stuff. And
that's like Tom Hanks and typewriters.
Sweet woman walked up to him and was like, "Here, I collected this for you." And he was like, "Oh, thank you so much." And then she walked away, and he was like, "I have 6 of these. Do you want it?" And so I was like, "Sure."
I think we should take this opportunity to tell a Tom Hanks anecdote that he told on the Nerdist podcast
About his typewriting.
He collects typewriters.
Yes.
And it's,
Which, by the way, the coolest of all of the collections.
but it's
I could
somewhat
think of.
known about him.
Right.
You know, it's not, obviously most people don't know that, but it's
Sure,
not a
it's-
secret that he collects typewriters. And so
Right.
people attempt to sell him or give him
Give him things
typewriters.
that they think are going to be super rare.
Or they just know that he wants a typewriter and they have a piece of furniture you could eat off of. And
Right.
it's
Yeah,
like typewriters. And he spoke very eloquently about how typewriters are beautiful for like 10 minutes.
Right.
And he told this story about how a woman wanted to sell him a typewriter to pay towards her daughter's college fund.
Right.
And he's talking about how much he loves typewriters. And he stops and he says, now the thing about typewriters is they're basically worthless. But he's Tom Hanks,
Right.
and he can't lowball some woman
Yeah.
that's trying to pay for her granddaughter. This was like, he
can't be like
wrote like a
$20.
$400 check for this. You know, they're not
Useless.
worth anything.
Right. Oh,
A
my
typewriter's
gosh.
worthless. Nobody uses a
They-
typewriter.
She should have paid him to take it
and
off
that's,
of his
but
hands.
I found that the most relatable
Yeah.
story because that's like everything
But-
I collect, where it's like,
But here's the thing,
It's like
though. That makes
newspapers.
sense, though. That
Yeah.
makes sense, though. Like, when I hear someone collects typewriters, I go, okay, that's like a idiosyncrasy sort of collection thing that I could see. That's a specific...
They have aesthetic
niche.
value. They have a history.
So Tom
I love
Wilson,
the history of an object.
Yeah, Tom Wilson with lunchboxes are a popular thing. Anything that's in pop culture realm, somebody who collects like, oh, I collect Star Trek stuff, or I collect, Doctor Who. Like all these things sort of, they're an interesting collection, but I get it. But I think the things that I find so fascinating is that your collections are like, yeah, I collect things that are so incredibly niche that I have to explain to you what they are.
Well, that's
in
why I
order for
don't
you to
ever.
understand.
This is one of the few times I've ever spoken about these.
Well, good.
And part of it is that I helped out running a comic book store for 8 or 9 years, and like I say, people come in and try and tell you the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh.
Is that store still standing? Do you want to give them love, or do you hate them? Bad
No,
blood?
I love the owner, but the store's
Store's gone,
he's retired. But you don't need to work at Comic-Con too many times to learn to like maybe shut up about the Hulk or whatever. It's not interesting to someone else.
Yeah.
And so even though I think what I collect is interesting, I've had been on the receiving end of so many conversations where someone tries to tell you about Pokemon cards. And I got nothing against Pokemon cards, but it's just like I don't want to hear about.
Right.
I'm not interested in Blastoise's backstory or whatever.
Sure.
That I consider I'm pretty guarded about what I collect. It's sort of a secret that I'm a big collector. It's other than Jackie. You heard about it on Jackie's show, but it's only talked about it a couple of times ever.
Right.
It was on podcasts.
Sure. Yeah.
So that gets the word out, I
There you
guess.
go.
But like, it's sort of like a secret hobby.
Right. Well, I don't know. I think it's fascinating. I think you're such a fascinating guy. I want to do this again one day soon. I also just want to get to know you better outside of the worlds of podcasts.
Yeah.
Especially because it seems like we have incredibly similar backstories.
We didn't talk about Ted Kaczynski at all.
Now, well, you mentioned that's 2 times you said the name, or maybe 3. I think you might have squeezed 2 in earlier.
No, I just mentioned it earlier because
Right.
it's one of my.
The name got in there. Well,
It's one of the things that I like talking about.
would you
on
like
podcast.
would you like me to name this episode?
No, it's
Okay. Just that way
It'll distract from
people
the,
can expect
the
that.
several other times that unrequested. I've changed the topic of conversation. I've steered it into like a 30-minute detour into Texans.
Do you want to do a whole extra episode that's just about him?
No, I'm just bringing it up
Okay.
as an example
Great.
of
Great.
my personality disorder.
I don't call it a disorder.
He's one of that's one that the general public can appreciate
Right. I
because
guess
he's the Unabomber.
Right. I
But
guess
that's one of many subjects. That's representative of the type of things
Right.
where I do know something.
right. And you have the information and it's readily available to you in the back of your brain somewhere.
Yeah, about the American freedom fighter.
I don't know what's supposed to be there. That's taking its place.
Knowledge of the Bachelorette or something. I don't know.
No, because
I got nothing against the Bachelor. I just don't know.
I don't think
People
so.
are talking about things all the time. I have no idea what they're talking about.
You know what? That's a fair point.
But I'm sure that I'm the odd one out because it's
You know
like
what?
it's the Fast and the Furious movies, and I just haven't seen one.
You know what?
Never seen one. I don't know anything. They drive cars in them.
I've seen the first one, and it's a point of contention amongst.
Vin Diesel might be in it.
Is that the guy from Riddick? Anyways, I do
know.
find it funny that you just said that because I've always seen it as like, we say like useless information. I mentioned her like, oh, you have like this wellspring of information in the back of your head, and you went like, yeah, too bad I can't use it for anything. And I think you just hit the nail on the head, or crack the case. Both metaphors, which I was about to use simultaneously there, if you caught that, which is everybody's filled with useless information. We all just have different useless information.
Yeah, if you work in a comic book store, you learn to not talk about it because people come in
Right.
that might be on the spectrum,
Sure,
or they might just be nerds.
Yeah.
And they will talk. It doesn't matter how little interest you express in what they're telling you. They will describe the plot of the Wolverine movie to you,
Yeah.
or whatever it is that they're on about,
or why it was
and
bad
so
or good. Yeah.
and so since I collect, evangelical Christian comic books from the 70s, there's just like a limited. There's a you know what I mean.
Probably have some Jesus comics back from my time in the cult when I grew up. Like I have some
Spire, drawn by Al Hartley, the Archie artist. I already have them all. I'm just curious if we can discuss the one thing I know about.
They don't look like Archie art. Did he draw them in the style of Archie?
Yes.
No.
Are they really dark?
No,
because there's only really two big branches of Christian comics. There's the Spire ones, which are published by an Archie artist who got permission. So everyone else that works at Archie is like a Jewish person because that's the comic book industry. But Al Hartley was an evangelical Christian, and he pitched the opportunity. He wanted to publish evangelical books.
Okay.
And the publishers at Archie were like, okay, cool. And so they did a bunch of Archie evangelical books, but they also adapted like Johnny Cash's biography. And Tom Landry's biography. So there's a bunch of like nonfiction autobiographical evangelical autobiography adaptations that become 22-page.
Spire? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Spire.
Okay.
That become 22-page comic books drawn in the Archie style.
All right.
And there's also ones that have the Archie characters
that interact
doing, explicitly Christian things.
See, that's not what. See, I know what I had at least. I'm assuming they still have them. They were literally comics that were just like a Bible story, and it was like a comic book style, and it was like
those are very boring. I don't collect those.
Here's the Moses story, and that's probably. So
I collect the Spire ones because they're interesting. I think for the reason I just described.
Right? Yeah. No.
Which is that Betty's evangelical. They're drawn in this really beautiful Archie style.
The fact that there's crossover with something that's mainstream.
Yeah, and there's a complete disconnect in a lot of them between the story and the art style. See, the art style is Archie, but the story, one of them's called Hansi, the Girl Who Loved the Swastika. And it's a real story. It's a real woman's biography.
My God.
She was a German Nazi youth who was then taken Russian prisoner of war. And then when
and Jughead,
she was taken prisoner of war somehow at the end of the war, and everyone gets raped by the Russians, but the Americans are different. And she meets an American GI, and she immigrates to America, and she becomes an evangelical Christian and lives in America. And she wrote a book about her life. And it's about how she was a mistake as a child to love the swastika. Right. You shouldn't put unquestioning faith in anything except Jesus. But it's this dark.
It is really, really fascinating.
It has explicitly, not just implied. They don't show it, but it's like the women are raped.
Oh my God!
It has Nazis
and also in that,
and it's a 22-page drawn in like a cartoonish, full 70s Archie style. And it's a masterpiece.
Sure. I could only imagine.
Because it's made with sincerity.
How many were there?
It's valuable, but it's relatively common.
Right, yeah.
They went through a couple printings. These were distributed pretty widely in Sunday school circles.
Right, of course, yeah. I mentioned earlier, probably where a lot of the pamphlets came from.
And so that's the most interesting one, but the Johnny Cash one's very interesting.
You mentioned earlier you don't watch like a lot of TV. Do you?
No, I watch a lot of sitcoms. I don't watch any movies.
I meant movies and things outside of that realm. Do you ever get caught up in like the collectors shows where they talk about like old crap? Because I never was able to get into like the Pawn Stars or like
Antiques Roadshow maybe,
like,
but that's it.
Antiques Roadshow, yeah.
I like Antiques Roadshow because the stuff is esoteric and interesting.
Right, it's always
the ones
bizarre.
That are about comics would never work for me.
Like comic book.
I
Man,
know
like
too much
Kevin
about
Smith
this.
show.
It's not. I can't suspend my disbelief.
They're also always so poorly because they're all staged.
I don't know anything about Navajo rug, so when one of them's on the Antique Roadshow, it's just like interesting.
You get to learn.
And as we've mentioned, I'm very I don't know why for whatever reason I'm just very interested in the history of the object and the physicality of the object.
Yeah.
And the Antiques Roadshow is all about that.
Fine
Whatever
details.
the object is, it's like, well, they talk about where they found it or how they inherited it or where it's been in the family or how much they paid for it. And it's like, it's a blanket. I bought it for $20 20 years ago. It's been on my rocking chair. And it's like, okay, well, this is a national treasure. That's a famous one of the Antiques Roadshow. They have like $1 million+ like it should be in the Smithsonian.
Right. In like a museum.
It's like one of the oldest known Navajo blankets, and it's in excellent condition. It's like something he bought at a garage sale and it's just been like letting his dog sleep on or something. It's like, okay, well, you need to get this. This needs to be, you shouldn't even sell this. You need to donate this, whatever, because this is a piece of American history.
Right.
But I love those stories.
Right.
And that's similar to like the Spire thing we just described.
Right. Yeah.
I like the backs. I think Hansi's very readable. You should look it up and read it.
Sure.
It's such a funny and interesting book. It's made with such sincerity. It wouldn't work if the artist wasn't sincere in him making this book. But it's also just the story of how it was published is interesting to me.
Yeah, the history of it, the fine details. It's all about the fine details
and the object itself and that it survived this long.
Right. That's part of it too. Anything that you hear stories about like, oh, like someone passed away and in the attic they found this like pristine brand new thing that was bought and stood the test of time because it was this perfect scenario. Those are always fascinating to me. I know I've been trying to wrap this up for 5 times.
No, there's 8 more hours of this.
But I recently became obsessed with YouTube videos of colorized footage that's been digitized and stabilized from like the 1940s. There's this one guy who just
Mike Upchurch made a really good one of these.
There's maybe that's the guy, but there's like a whole YouTube channel where it's like the neighborhood that I live in. It's like Burbank,
cool,
suburban Burbank in 1941, and it's just somebody with a camera
and you're
on
trying
the
to
back of a
pinpoint
truck.
whatever buildings still recognize.
Yep. And it's just literally like somebody who for whatever reason who has a camera on the back of a truck and they're driving around suburbia. And it's from the 1940s, but it's like great picture quality.
Mr. Show
colorized.
writer and video editor Mike Upchurch made a really good one of these 5 or 6 years ago, maybe ahead of the curve on this, where he took the footage that's of San Francisco before the earthquake. So it's some of the oldest footage, street footage, I think, period, because it's from like 1907 or something, and it's silent film, but it's just on a carriage going through the streets of like downtown San Francisco before it all burned down.
Definitely saw
and
that
he
one.
stabilized it, and then he added a soundtrack by making all the like clip clap noises and street pattern stuff.
That's what this guy does. So he just adds like a general car sound. Then if he drives by,
and
car,
if a horse walks in, you go, but he does all the sound effects to make it to try and make you so you can really experience that footage.
Fast. Yeah. So that became obsessed with that this past weekend, and it was all I watched for like. I should have been writing, and instead I was just doing this for hours and hours and hours. Anyways, Jason, you're a delight. This is a delight. It was very fun getting to know you a little bit better. I look forward to getting to know you even more in the future. And now that you've got the pup, maybe we take a
who just
dog
hung out
adventure.
the whole time.
He played for a little while and then he just relaxed.
He's just like hanging out. He didn't bark.
Now he knows we're talking about him. Looking at him right now.
He didn't eat.
He played with
your
toys.
furniture.
No, he had plenty of toys to play with. This is a very dog friendly
He's a dream
home.
puppy.
He is a dream pup. You can find Jason on both Twitter and Instagram at Jason Van Glass, not a automotive glass company, but indeed a comedian.
Spelled that way.
But it is spelled that way. Is there anything else in the doc? I know like it's a weird thing to say at the end of a pandemic.
Nothing's back yet.
Right. Yeah. We're all
my schedule's wide open.
Right.
If you're booking a stand-up show and it's
Sure.
not weird. I 100% want to do it, and it can be outside, but I don't want to do it if it's like weirdos are there.
Yeah. No weirdos.
I keep getting invited to open mics.
Oh,
And it's like I'm not doing an open mic in the parking lot.
No.
I just don't have. But I'll do a show.
In fairness,
I'll do a show. If you run a show in a parking lot, I'll do it.
The shows in the parking lot of the Meltdown right after it shut down were pretty fantastic. I'm not sure if you were.
We could do that now.
Range.
I don't know if the building's still there, but I think we could go and
Probably.
someone should start the show and then book me.
Well, this has been a blast, as I've said. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. To all the listeners out there, just a little bit of business, please. If you're enjoying these programs, of course, do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Head on over to the Apple Podcasts. Leave a 5-star review. Leave a 4-star review. Leave a 1-star review. I don't care. Just leave a review. Tell us what you think of these conversations. Please follow our guest at Jason Van Glass. Find me on Twitter and Instagram at Jake Lloyd Bacon. And the podcast has its own social media at Elaborate Pod. I'm bad at this. I don't do it, but it's there. Follow it. It helps the show because apparently that stuff is important. There is some merchandise. There's a brand new shirt featuring one half of the Clarion Call that I end every episode with. The Create Art shirt is now available in the shop, as well as masks, mugs, and all sorts of other really fun, not just Elaborate stuff, but stuff for all of Dragon Wagon Radio, as well as original designs. You can find all that stuff at elaboratepod.com. Join the Discord, hang out and chat with us. We chat about all sorts of fun stuff in the Discord. Check out Jason's other appearance on the network when he hung out with Takura McCullough for an episode of the Monkeys podcast, which was
fun.
Delightfully fun show. And I guess that'll do it. So as I say at the end of each one of these, thank you so much for listening. Please, I beg you all, create art, not content. Be artists, not influencers. Thanks for coming, Jason. I love you.
That was a good I like that little slogan.
Thanks.
James Baldwin once wrote, "I am what time, circumstance, and history have made of me, certainly, but I am also much more than that." And that's really why I wanted to start Black on Black. My name is Julian Michael. I'm a comedian, I'm a writer, I'm an educator. I do a lot of things, but really, Black on Black isn't about me. It's about sharing stories of all kinds of people from across the diaspora, and I hope that when you listen, you'll learn something, you'll enjoy, and you'll start a conversation. Check out Black on Black right here on Dragon Wagon Radio.
It's Dragon Wagon.